John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, got his head blown off in Dallas on November 22, 1963, and somehow, over 60 years later, we still can't agree on the basic facts of what happened. Officially, Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who defected to the Soviet Union, came back and was working at a book depository, shot Kennedy from the 6th floor with a mail-order rifle that cost $21. Simple case closed, right? Except Oswald himself was murdered on live television 2 days later by Jack Ruby, a nightclub owner with mob connections, before he could stand trial or explain literally anything. So the guy who supposedly assassinated the president got assassinated before his trial, which is either the worst luck in history or the most convenient cover-up ever. The Warren Commission concluded it was Oswald acting alone, but then, in 1978, the House Select Committee on Assassinations said, actually, there probably was a conspiracy, so even the government can't keep its story straight. Then there's the magic bullet theory, which requires you to believe that a single bullet entered Kennedy's back, exited his throat, entered Texas Governor John Connally's back, exited his chest, went through his wrist, and embedded itself in his thigh, basically doing a pinball machine route through two different people. The bullet they found was almost completely intact, which according to forensic experts is impossible given all the bone it supposedly went through. Multiple witnesses heard shots coming from the grassy knoll, not from the book depository where Oswald allegedly was. The Zapruder film, the famous home video of the assassination, shows Kennedy's head snapping backward violently, which according to basic physics suggests the shot came from the front, not from behind where Oswald supposedly was. And then there's the suspicious death parade. Over 60 material witnesses died within 3 years of the assassination, including car crashes, heart attacks, suicides, shootings, and one guy who got his throat cut. An actuary calculated the odds of that many witnesses dying that quickly as 1 in 100,000 trillion. The CIA, the Mafia, anti-Castro Cubans, pro-Castro Cubans, the Soviet Union, Lyndon B. Johnson, literally everyone has been accused. The government sealed thousands of documents related to the assassination until 2029, which is definitely what you do when there's absolutely nothing suspicious to hide. Natalie Wood, the Hollywood actress who starred in West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, drowned in 1981 under circumstances so bizarre that they reopened the investigation 30 years later and still haven't figured it out. She was on a yacht called Splendor off Catalina Island with her husband Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. Somehow, she ended up in the ocean at night wearing a nightgown, down jacket, and socks, not exactly swimming attire. The official story was that she tried to secure a dinghy that was banging against the yacht and slipped and fell into the water. But here's where this gets weird. Natalie Wood was absolutely terrified of dark water her entire life. A fortune teller had told her mother that Natalie would die in dark water, and she genuinely believed it. She avoided water scenes in movies, had panic attacks near deep water, and wouldn't even take baths in dark bathrooms. So the idea that she voluntarily went out onto the deck alone at night to tie up a dinghy? That's like someone with a deadly snake phobia deciding to go wrangle cobras at midnight. The boat captain later said he heard Robert Wagner and Natalie having a heated argument that night. He claimed Wagner smashed a wine bottle and said something like, "What are you trying to do? Seduce my wife?" to Christopher Walken. The captain said that when they realized Natalie was missing, Wagner told him, "Don't do anything." And they waited hours before calling the Coast Guard. Why would you wait to call for help if your wife fell overboard? Christopher Walken has refused to discuss that night in detail for 40 years, which is definitely what innocent witnesses do. The coroner found fresh bruises on Natalie's arms, legs, and face that were consistent with a struggle, not with someone gently slipping into water. In 2011, they reopened the case and changed the cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, which is bureaucratic speak for we have no idea what happened. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest, but he's refused to speak with investigators. He's now 94 years old, and the truth probably died with him. Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam. A 21-year-old Canadian student was found dead in a water tank on the roof of the Cecil Hotel in Los Angeles in 2013, and the surveillance footage of her last moments is the creepiest thing you'll ever see. She was staying at the Cecil Hotel, which, by the way, has a history that includes being where serial killer Richard Ramirez stayed during his murder spree, and where another serial killer, Jack Unterweger, also stayed. It's basically the hotel murder. Guests at the Cecil started complaining that the water tasted weird and had low pressure. Maintenance went up to check the water tanks on the roof and found Elisa's naked body floating in one of them. The tank was 4 feet wide and 8 feet tall, covered with a heavy lid that's difficult to open. The roof access was locked and alarmed. Security footage from an elevator shows Elisa acting extremely strangely, pressing all the buttons, hiding in the corner, stepping in and out of the elevator repeatedly, making strange hand gestures and appearing to talk to someone who isn't there. She seems terrified of something. The official cause of death was accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder as a significant contributing factor. But here's the problem. How did she get onto the locked roof? How did she get into a water tank with a heavy lid? Why was she naked when her clothes were found floating in the tank with her? The police said there was no evidence of foul play, but they also couldn't explain how she accessed the roof or got into the sealed tank. Some people think it was a psychotic episode caused by stopping her bipolar medication. Others think someone was chasing her, which is why she was hiding in the elevator. Some conspiracy theorists point out that there's a movie called Dark Water about a girl who drowns in a water tank, and Elisa had posted about that movie. There's also a tuberculosis test called Lam Elisa, and the Cecil Hotel is in a part of LA that was having a tuberculosis outbreak at the time. Creepy coincidences or meaningful patterns we'll never know because the investigation was closed, ruled accidental, and that's that. Tamam Shud case. The Somerton Man. The Somerton Man. An unidentified guy was found dead on an Australian beach in 1948, and 75 years later we finally identified him, but we still don't know how or why he died. On December 1st, 1948, a man's body was discovered on Somerton Beach in Adelaide. He was well dressed, leaning against a seawall, and dead. He had no identification, no wallet, no labels in his clothes. Someone had deliberately cut out every label. In his pocket was a scrap of paper with the words Tamam Shud printed on it, which is Persian for finished or ended. Police traced the paper to an extremely rare book called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a copy of which was found in someone's car with the last page torn out where the Tamam Shud came from. Inside the book was a phone number for a nurse named Jessica Thompson and a series of letters that appeared to be a code. MRGOABABD. Nobody has ever cracked that code. The autopsy was bizarre. The man had an enlarged spleen, blood in his stomach, and congestion in his organs consistent with poisoning, but they couldn't find any poison. His pupils were unusually small. His last meal was a pasty, which doesn't narrow anything down in Australia. He had an unusual genetic trait where his upper lateral incisors were missing, which is extremely rare. One of his calf muscles was unnaturally large, suggesting he was a ballet dancer or a professional athlete. Jessica Thompson was questioned and turned deathly pale when shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, but she denied knowing him. Years later, her daughter claimed Jessica had lied and did know him, possibly from intelligence work during World War II. Theories range from Soviet spy to scorned lover to witness protection gone wrong. In 2022, they finally used DNA and genealogy to identify him as Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. But we still don't know why he died, who killed him, if it was murder, or what the code means. Dyatlov Pass. Incident: the Dyatlov Pass. Incident: 9 experienced Russian hikers died in the Ural Mountains in 1959 under circumstances so strange that people are still arguing about what happened. Igor Dyatlov led a group of 10 hikers on a skiing expedition. One guy turned back early because he was sick, which is the luckiest decision anyone ever made. The remaining 9 set up camp on the slope of Kolatsyakol, which translates to Dead Mountain, always a good sign. When they didn't return on schedule, search parties found their tent cut open from the inside with all their belongings still there. The hikers had fled into the freezing wilderness wearing minimal clothing. Some were in just underwear. Their bodies were found scattered across the area over the next few months. Some died of hypothermia, which makes sense, but others had massive internal injuries, fractured skulls, broken ribs. One woman was missing her tongue and eyes. The injuries were described as equivalent to a car crash, but there was no external trauma to the skin. One of the victims had significant radiation on her clothing. Some of the clothing had traces of radiation. Witnesses reported seeing bright orange spheres in the sky around the time and location of their deaths. The Soviet investigation concluded they died from a compelling natural force, which is the vaguest possible explanation. Theories include avalanche, except there was no evidence of an avalanche and experienced hikers would know not to camp in an avalanche zone. Military testing gone wrong, which might explain the radiation and internal injuries. Infrasound causing panic where wind through the mountains creates low-frequency sound that induces fear. Or a Yeti, which is probably not it but is definitely the most fun theory. In 2019, Russian investigators reopened the case and concluded it was an avalanche. But that doesn't explain the radiation, the missing tongue and eyes, or why they cut their way out of the tent, instead of using the door. The tent was intact. They deliberately cut it open from the inside to escape something. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe, the most famous actress in the world, was found dead in her bedroom on August 5, 1962, and the official story makes absolutely no sense. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate poisoning, ruled as probable suicide. She allegedly took 40 to 50 Nembutal pills. But here's the problem. There were no pill residues in her stomach, which there should have been with that many pills. There was no water glass by her bed. The autopsy found the drugs were absorbed rectally, not orally, which suggests someone administered them as an enema, not exactly a typical suicide method. Her housekeeper's story changed multiple times about when she found the body and when she called the police. There was a several-hour delay between finding the body and calling authorities. The Los Angeles Police Department's files on her death mysteriously disappeared. Her phone records from that night also disappeared. Marilyn had affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was allegedly at her house the night she died, according to some witnesses, though he denied being in Los Angeles that day. Marilyn had kept a secret diary where she wrote about things the Kennedy brothers told her, including sensitive government information. That diary disappeared and has never been found. She'd also fired her publicist days before her death and was planning a press conference, possibly to reveal details about her affairs. The FBI had been monitoring her because of her relationship with the Kennedys and because she'd been married to playwright Arthur Miller, who had communist associations. Some theories say the Kennedys had her killed to prevent her from going public. Others say the mafia killed her to embarrass the Kennedys. Still, others say it genuinely was suicide, but the Kennedys had evidence, removed to avoid scandal. Her housekeeper found her lying face down in a soldier's position, which is not how people die from drug overdoses. They usually curl up. The room was described as Too tidy for a suicide, with no signs of distress or struggle. And the fact that everyone involved, the Kennedys, the FBI, the LAPD, had motives to cover something up means we'll probably never know what actually happened. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe. The master of horror died in 1849 under mysterious circumstances that could have come from one of his own stories. On October 3rd, Poe was found delirious on the streets of Baltimore, wearing clothes that weren't his. He was incoherent and couldn't explain what happened to him. He kept calling out for someone named Reynolds, though nobody knows who that was. He died 4 days later in the hospital, never becoming coherent enough to explain what happened. The official cause of death was listed as congestion of the brain, which was Victorian-era medical speak for "we have no idea." His medical records disappeared, and nobody knows where he was or what he was doing for the 5 days before he was found. He was supposed to be traveling from Richmond to New York, but somehow ended up in Baltimore in someone else's clothes. Theories about his death include cooping, which was a form of voter fraud where gangs kidnapped people, drugged them, disguised them, and forced them to vote multiple times at different polling places, which would explain the clothing and delirium. Rabies, because his symptoms match rabies perfectly, including hydrophobia, confusion, and aggression. Brain tumor, which could cause the delirium and was common but undiagnosed at the time, or simple alcohol poisoning, though Poe had reportedly been sober for months before his death. Some researchers think he had a rare genetic condition that made him extremely sensitive to alcohol, so even a small amount could have killed him. The cooping theory is popular because Election Day was the day after he was found, and cooping was common in Baltimore at that time. But if it was cooping, the gangs usually released their victims after the election, and Poe died instead. The clothing change suggests someone dressed him in different clothes, which supports cooping or possibly a robbery gone wrong. We'll never know because Victorians were terrible at preserving evidence and his medical records vanished. The Isdal Woman. The Isdal Woman. An unidentified woman was found dead in a Norwegian valley in 1970, and the case is so weird that it reads like a spy novel. Her body was discovered in a remote area called Isdalen Valley, partially burned. Someone had tried to burn her body and destroy evidence. Her fingerprints had been sanded off. Her face was unrecognizable. All the labels were removed from her clothes. She had used at least 8 fake identities and traveled around Norway using different names. She stayed at multiple hotels, always paying cash, never staying long. Witnesses described her as wearing wigs and disguises. In her luggage, police found coded notes, dozens of fake travel documents, and more disguises. She'd been moving around Scandinavia and Western Europe extensively. The autopsy found carbon monoxide in her blood and large amounts of sleeping pills, levels high enough to be fatal. But she also had bruises suggesting a struggle, and someone had tried to burn her body after death, which suicides don't typically do themselves. She was found with a bunch of bottles of liquor and sleeping pills nearby, suggesting suicide. But the coded notes, fake identities, and destroyed fingerprints suggest she was involved in espionage. At the time, Norway was a hotspot for Cold War spy activity. Some investigators think she was an Israeli Mossad agent. Others think she was a Soviet spy. Still others think she was involved in smuggling operations. In 2016, they tried to identify her using isotope analysis of her teeth, which showed she'd spent her early life in Germany or possibly France. In 2017, new witnesses came forward saying they'd seen her with multiple men in suits who looked like intelligence operatives. But we still don't know who she was, who killed her, if it was murder, or what she was doing in Norway. Judith Barcy, Judith Barcy. This one's not mysterious in the sense of we don't know what happened. We know exactly what happened, and it's horrible. But it belongs here because of how completely preventable it was, and how many people failed to stop it. Judith was a child actress who voiced Ducky in The Land Before Time, and Anne Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. She was 10 years old in 1988 when her father, Joseph Barsi, shot her and her mother while they slept, then set the house on fire and killed himself. But here's the thing. Everyone knew he was dangerous. Teachers, agents, social workers, neighbors. They all reported his violent behavior. He had repeatedly threatened to kill his wife and daughter. He was an alcoholic who physically abused both of them. Judith showed up to auditions with bruises. She started pulling out her own eyelashes and hair from stress. She told her agent's wife that her father had threatened to cut her throat. Child Protective Services investigated multiple times and did nothing. The police were called to the house repeatedly for domestic violence and did nothing. 4 months before the murders, Judith's agent reported the abuse and CPS closed the case as unfounded. Why? Because Joseph was charming when investigators visited. Because he threatened Maria, Judith's mother, into covering for him. Because the 1980s system was even worse at protecting abuse victims than it is now. Maria had planned to leave with Judith, but kept delaying. Friends offered her places to stay. She kept saying, not yet. Then one night, Joseph got drunk, shot them both while they slept, poured gasoline throughout the house, and lit it on fire before shooting himself. The fire burned for hours before firefighters arrived. When they found the bodies, Judith was still holding her mother. The case sparked reforms in how California handles child abuse cases, but those reforms came too late for Judith. She died because every single system designed to protect her failed. Everyone knew, and nobody did enough. Well, if you don't want to end up like those people, subscribe to our channel. Until then, take care.